What's happening, people? Scarfy Spurs Talk here with third episodes of these weekly live shows, Monday, 8 p.m. Today, I'm joined by David, known as Davids on YouTube. So, David, how are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. Nice and easy when Spurs pick up 3 points. How about yourself?
Yes, I'm very, very well, thank you. And there's something you wanted to do, if I'm correct.
Yeah, so just for those of you guys who know me and have known my channel before, on Saturday, my previous co-host of my Spurs show, Ramon, it will be his birthday. He passed away 2 years ago in the summer. So we're just going to take a minute to remember him and any other friends or families lost over the years that are important to us all. Sometimes life gets upon ourselves, and it's good just to take that moment to reflect and remember those that we've lost.
Thank you, David. Lovely moment
No
there.
worries. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe if you like it. Leave a like and feel free to interact in the comments, and I'll read out as many as we can. So let's get into it, shall we? The post-match reaction to the
Let's
West
go
Ham
for it.
game. Before we do that, I think it's important to highlight that both sets of players took a knee for the second weekend running in support of the Premier League's No Room for Racism campaign. And also, Stellini took charge of the third game this season as Conte remains in Italy after post-match operation that followed his recent gallbladder surgery. So let's get into the West Ham game. So, David, 100% record under Stellini. That's 3 wins out of 3. Now, what's your thought on 3 games he's been in charge?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I'm not going to say I was particularly confident going into it. I didn't even know where West Ham were in the table until about 20 minutes before kickoff. And when I realised that they were 18th and looked at their record this season, I thought it's got to be, it's got to be a game you pick up 3 points because one, it's West Ham, two, you're playing at home, and three, no matter who was in charge, the form of West Ham at the moment, you have to think it's an opportunity to capitalise. I think Stellini's looked for me personally, if you were looking at that performance and didn't know who's magic, you'd think that's a manager who's been in the game 30 years as a first team coach. And I would say that about all his performances that he's managed in. So for me, it was a calm, composed, professional performance. I would have liked another goal. I would have liked a penalty, but VAR works its wonders, doesn't it? But other than that, I think it was a professional, calm performance. 3 points, clean sheet is important. I think it's just another step in the right direction.
Absolutely, Will said you make some very good points. For me personally, going into that game, it's a must-win game. It's a London derby. We struggled. I think London derbies this season. I think we struggled of late as well, generally with form. And I think perfect for Stellini. 3 wins in 3. I think that's perfect. The players have shown that without Conte they can still do it. But also another important thing is we're back up to 4th. So what's your reaction about that, David? Do you look at the table? Do you get encouraged, or do you try and ignore that?
I think for me, I try and ignore the table unless we're way, way away from where we need to be. I struggle to really focus on the table until about April time, just purely because last year, if you were sitting there pulling your hair out in sort of end of February, beginning of March, we're miles behind, we're miles behind, we're miles behind, we're miles behind. And then lo and behold, Arsenal lost to Newcastle. They lost again. They dropped points left, right, and centre. And it pulled us up in that place. And I have a lot of admiration for Eddie Howe on the job he's done at Newcastle this year. But anyone saying they were guaranteed top 4 after 5 games was always premature. And that's why I think it's important not to get ahead of yourselves, but also not to try and act like there are already points on the table that aren't. The most important thing are the numbers. We're 4th. There's games left to play. I can't remember exactly how many, but there's games left to play. I think sort of second, third week of April, I think look at where we are domestically, look at where we are in the Champions League, look at where we are in the FA Cup, touch wood if we're still in it at that point, and then sit there and say, okay, this is the outcome of our season, rather than, halfway through the season. There's still plenty of games to play in all competitions. And I think people tend to get carried away with themselves, looking at the table and going, oh, this manager's doing awfully, when actually, whether you win the first 19 games of the season or the last 19, wherever you finish is the most important thing. And until the end of April, you're not really going to get a gauge and understanding as to where you're going to finish. So as far as I'm concerned, don't stress about it until then, unless, of course, if you're 20 points off top four going into February, that's when you start having a conversation about it. We're not in that place. We're not Liverpool. We're not in that place. So as far as I'm concerned, no stress at the moment.
Yeah, thank you, David. You make some really good points. But what I find interesting is you said, don't really concentrate on the table until you get to April, May. So when you get to that point, where would you like to see us in the table realistically that you would consider a successful season?
I would like, but based on, I mean, ideally, I would like us to be top, right? It's not going to happen, unfortunately. But assuming that we're in the later stages of the FA Cup and assuming we beat Milan in the Champions League, I would hope that by the end of April, we'd be at least 5 points clear in fourth. That would be my aim. That was kind of the comfortable place to be. I think if Newcastle do lose that final against Man United, I think it's going to take a toll. And I want us to capitalize on that. Whether we do that in the next 6 games or the last 6 games doesn't really matter that much, as long as we capitalize when we can. And I think for me personally, I want to see us 5 points at the end of April. I want to see us in at least the FA Cup semi-final, depending on when the rounds are played. I can't remember exactly. I want to see us to have made it to at least the quarter-final and given a good account of ourselves in the Champions League. And I want to see us at least 5 points clear in top 4. I think they're my minimum expectations. And we'll go on and talk about Conte in a minute. I don't think he's going to be here at the end of the season. If he's not, then the right foundations needs to be put in place for another manager. And part of that is Champions League football next season. I think that's non-negotiable for any other manager coming in. If you want anybody who's going to be able to build on what we've already got, add a bit more depth, add a bit more quality, I think top 4 is that minimum requirement. So for me, if we're not 4 to 5 points clear by the end of April, then I have a bit of concern.
Yeah, I agree. And to be honest, I would take that right now, take being 5 points clear, in top form. We will get on to, the discussions later on in the show. So stay with us about Conte. Remember to keep those comments coming, guys, because this is live. I want to know your thoughts on the team news, David, before the game, because obviously you had Richarlison started, which lots of fans, I don't know about you, but certainly me, wanted to see him start. You had Emerson starting over Porro, which I don't think was too much of a surprise. But the surprise, I think, was seeing Davis starting left wing back. If I'm right, I believe that's the first time he started left wing back since we played Real Madrid in the Champions League under Poch, which is feels a really long time.
It's been a while. It's been a while.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. So it's a long while. And also Skip was the man who partnered Højbjerg as well. So I want to know, what was your initial thoughts on the team news as it was announced?
So the Richarlison thing, I wasn't damned either way. I think I'd rather have seen Danjuma start over Richarlison. The pure reason being, and I mentioned it to you before we started, and I'll talk about it later, but I don't think that that left wing position is suited for Richarlison at all. I don't think in the way it plays in this system it's particularly suited for Son either. Whereas I think someone like Danjuma, the pace, the energy, the creativity, he can be a bit more central, which is where the left wing moves to in Conte's system. I think that would have been better suited over the duration of the game. I was surprised Longley started, to be honest with you. I think I had high hopes for him. I'm a little bit disappointed, if I'm honest, but that might be my my football manager attachment that's had the high hopes. But I think my initial reaction was, oh my God, we're screwed when I saw Davies at left wing back. But in hindsight, we went for the more defensive option on either side. I think that was with the intention of soaking up the pressure from West Ham. Actually, West Ham didn't really put any pressure on. So I think it was the more conservative, the more safe option. but also I don't think we needed it in the end. But I understand why Stellini going with a bit more caution, not necessarily being as experienced, not necessarily having the in-game management experience that Conte's got. I think it makes sense to go with the more defensive option. And if you need more attacking later in the game, go for it. But I think Davies and Emerson were absolutely fantastic. I've not seen a performance like that from a defensive left wing back, and it wasn't as good. But since Jan Vertonghen played left wing back at Wembley against Dortmund, that was the last time I've seen a defensive left-sided player play so well in such an attacking role for Spurs. In terms of Skip, I wasn't concerned. I would have liked to have seen Sarr, and I thought he was good when he came on, but didn't get really a lot of time. And that's why, for me personally, I think if we are to move on from Conte in the future, we need to go for a 3-man midfield because we've got too many midfielders that are good enough to play. I just think they're a bit wasted only playing with 2. Other than that, I thought everything else was what I expected, to be honest. I wasn't really concerned. I did put when the team news announced we're screwed, but it's just me being pessimistic. So yeah, it got 3 points, so that's all that matters ultimately.
Yeah, it's exactly. And, thank you, David. I think it's interesting. And since you touched on it, about Richarlison, which is interesting, before I get your opinion on it, I'd like to say I don't think Richarlison, for me anyway, is playing in the right position to get the best out of him at the moment, being stuck on the wing. I don't know about you, David, but I was really happy to see his name on the team sheet. But, I knew that he would play, in Son's position. I don't think that's the best position for him. You see him play the number 9 role for Brazil. I know people say it's different because it is. You've got loads of exciting attacking players, Neymar, Rafinha, Brazil to supply you. He does so well with Brazil at that. I'd like to see him playing either alongside Kane or in that number 9 role with Kane dropping behind him in the number 10 role. And I've thought about this and how we get outnumbered in midfield sometimes, and how Kane could drop in to make it a 3 midfield without the ball. That would solve our problems with being outnumbered in midfield. I think that would solve our creative issues and solve the Richarlison issue. But David, I come to you. I want to know your thoughts on Richarlison. I know we briefly discussed it beforehand.
Yeah.
I think you have a different proposal about Richarlison to get the best out of him.
Yeah, so if, for example, we were playing under a different manager who played, say, a 4-2-3-1, then Richarlison as the number 9 and Kane as the number 10 for me is a complete fantastic. I agree with it. The only game I've managed to get to this season, unfortunately, due to work, was the 2-0 win at home to Marseille in the Champions League. If you look at Richarlison's position for both of those goals, he was in between the centre-back and the full-back at the back post or on the edge of the 6-yard box. And that's where he scored the 2 goals against Marseille, maybe slightly further out, but that's in and around where he was. He was in the space between the fullback and one-sided centre-back at the back post, won both headers, scored, we won 2-0. Now, if you look at the heat map this season and the average position of players, that left winger tucks into midfield, slightly more advanced than the 2 central midfielders. But kind of, so you've got Højbjerg sits ever so slightly deeper, Bentancur is ever so slightly forward, and then Son who's ever so slightly further forward than that. For me personally, I would like to see Kane start on the left, moving into that space with him and Kulusevski and their passing ability, playing those balls into Richarlison. Richarlison's strong enough to play off of Kane and vice versa, and off of Kulusevski and vice versa. He'd be more central, which means in my opinion, means he'd be more effective. And while Kane might not get the goals, I think that would provide the service for Richarlison. Is that a long-term solution? I think the answer is no. But it's hard to discuss a long-term solution when we don't know who the manager's going to be for next season. Contract talks have stalled. I'd say the odds of Conte signing a new deal right now are about 10%. And with that being the case, if we were talking about this under a manager who played 4-2-3-1 or who played 4-3-3, then it wouldn't be Richarlison on the left, Kulusevski on the right. It would be Son, Kane, Kulusevski, and then, Danjuma, Richarlison, Bryan Hill. At that point, then Richarlison for me is effective. So I'm not going to dwell on too much about it not working at the moment because I don't see Conte at Spurs beyond the end of the season. But I think between now and then, if we start Kane centrally, start Son on the left, If Son's having a difficult game, take Son off, bring Kane onto the left, get him to drop deeper, get Richarlison and Kulusevski making those runs with Perisic going beyond. And I think we'll get a lot more out of that creatively than playing Richarlison off the left. I think he's wasted off the left. He is a number 9 in its truest sense. And I think right now he's being absolutely wasted on the left. I don't think there's any benefit to it whatsoever. At this point, Kane can't break Shearer's record this season anyway. He's still going to get goals from a deeper position. I would definitely like to see that be the way we line up against AC Milan in the Champions League for sure. And then moving to that later in the league, we're never going to sub Kane off unless he's injured. Drop him a bit deeper. He's not doing the legwork. We know he can bully players off the ball when he drops into midfield anyway. And we know he's got the passing ability. Look at the assist for Son's goal. Kane doing that with Richarlison, Perisic running along. Kane can release the ball to Perisic, make a run into the box himself. And at that point, you've got Perisic crossing, Kane, Richarlison slightly further forward, and then Kulusevski coming in off the right rather. I think that gives us more creativity, more options, and Kane's the one starting the process, not Son or Richarlison from the left.
Thank you, David. Yeah, I like that explanation. I summarised that really well, and I like the idea. Guys, get your comments in. I want to know.
I'd be interested to know what people think about that because
so am I. I want to hear.
It might not work practically, but it can't be worse than what it has been.
Yeah, very true. And for me, I want to see a formation change. As much as I like to see the formation working that we've got now, whether you call it 3-4-3 or 3-4-2-1, it's basically the same. It's very similar formation that has been played, for a long time now under Conte for us. I personally, as much as I'd like to see it back 4, I think it's unrealistic for the rest of the season under Conte. I would like to see us go to a 3-5-2 for a few different reasons. One, I'd like to see Richarlison and Kane as a front 2. I think that's getting more out of your 50-60 million player in Richarlison, which is key, because it's maybe an unpopular opinion, but I think on his day Richarlison's as good as, if not better than Jesus. So
I'd agree with that.
Yeah, and I'd like to see Richarlison. I think that would resolve his problem. I think it resolve our being outnumbered in midfield problem with that extra man in there. Creative issues, I think that would solve it. Those two up front. So yeah, and David, I find your points really, really interesting. We will get onto Conte, and we will get more onto the formation later on. We will get onto that. But I want to know, because you touched a bit on Sonny, I want to know, going into it, before the game, when team news was announced, did you think it was the right thing to drop him? And 2, would you do it again against Chelsea?
I do think it's the right thing to drop him. And like I said before, I don't think for Richarlison in that role was the right thing, but I do think it was right to drop him. Chelsea's a difficult one, right? Because they've got the physicality in defence now with their new centre-back signing from Monaco, which they didn't have as much before after losing Rudiger and Christensen, who I think was a lot stronger than people gave him credit for. I think the physical presence of Richarlison and Kane up front together could be a benefit. However, my concern is in the past where Richarlison's been hot-headed, is a London derby against an out-of-form Chelsea, which are going to be stressed, frustrated, aggressive, really the right game to have him start. And as much as I think Son needs to be dropped again, Son starting and playing with 11 men is better than Richarlison starting and ending up playing with 10. And I wouldn't be surprised if Richarlison ended up with multiple warnings and 2 bookings if he was to start against that Chelsea team who have frustrated us and, got under our nails and got under our skin for many, many occasions. I think if they were to see Richarlison on that starting 11 list, they'd be targeting him from the off. Awful tackles, clips on the back of the ankle, little things that aren't quite enough for a yellow card, but are just going to wind him up. And when he does snap, he'll be sent off and then we will lose. And with Chelsea in the form they're in right now, we don't need to be the reason that they start getting their shit together. So for me, it's difficult. It's really, really difficult. If it was me, I would probably go with 4-4-2. If I was manager personally and I was coming up against Chelsea, and it was my choice, I'd go with 4-4-2. I'd go with Davies and Emerson, more defensive wing backs. I'd go with Son off the left, Kulusevski off the right. I'd go with Skip and Højbjerg again, and I'd have them more defensive. And then I would have Kane and Richarlison up front. So you play your balls out wide. You play your balls out to your fullbacks. They play it out to your wingers into your midfielders, up to your strikers, and vice versa. I think it would be very defensive. I think it would be very, very counter-attacking. And like you say, there's a risk of being outnumbered in midfield. But then Chelsea playing with a 3-man midfield that includes Mason Mount at the moment, they might as well be playing with 2 men in midfield anyway. So at that point, is it a risk worth taking? If it was my decision, I was Tottenham manager, that would be my starting 11. I think that gets the best out of everybody. The other option is potentially a 4-4-1-1 like we used to play under Harry Redknapp. Skip and Højbjerg in your midfield, Son and Kulusevski on the wing, your defensive fullbacks, and then Kane as a 10, Richarlison up front. I would argue that's potentially more effective offensively than the 4-4-2 and just as defensively. It's difficult because we know that's not going to happen, right? We know we're going to play a back 3 anyway. It's very difficult. What I would do and what I think realistically Stellini or Conte, if he was there, would do are 2 completely different things. I think you probably go with Son just to minimize the risk of Richarlison being aggravated. You say that, Son will start and get sent off now. I've said that. I just think they'll get under Richarlison's skin too much in a London derby. I don't think it's worth the risk personally.
Yeah, no, you make a very good point, and you've got to remember, the type of player, Richarlison is. I think you make very good points, very valid points, if you like, David. And we will get onto later in the show individual performances and how, we both feel and how you guys feel going into that Chelsea game. But I want to remain focused on the West Ham game. So I want to know, David, first, who was your player of the match?
It's difficult. Really difficult. And my top 3 choices are Højbjerg, Romero, and Emerson. But for me, the consistency, the improvement, and the goal, it has to be Emerson. Absolutely has to be Emerson. There wasn't a ball he didn't win. There wasn't a pass he didn't make. There wasn't a tackle he didn't go in for. There wasn't a situation which he looked uncomfortable. He was absolutely sensational. And I think the relationship him and Romero are developing on that right-hand side, both of them were absolutely outstanding in that game. Defensively, going forward, the progressiveness, the changes from defense to attack. But for me, it's got to be Emerson. And that's not to take away from Højbjerg. I thought the assist was fantastic. I thought his overall play was brilliant, or the ball, from Højbjerg was great. His overall play was fantastic. He really has been a warrior this season. But for me, it's got to be Emerson. What a performance. What a performance.
Yeah, I think you made, very good shout there. Big up to Spurs Live in the comments, who's leaving lots of comments. He agrees. He says Emerson has to be, and also points out, Romero and Emerson on fire. And also don't forget about Kane, which I think is also a very good point. Also, big shout out to A View from the South Stand, who left a comment up earlier. Yeah, big up, guys. Great channel. Go check their content out. They do some great stuff. For me, I think the likes of Kane, I think, was good. Well, mainly, actually, it's focused on the players that done really well. I think Romero, Højbjerg, I thought them 2, I thought were really good. And probably Emerson as well. Again, he almost played another blinder again, didn't he? For me, probably slightly biased because of my love towards Højbjerg. But I would say Højbjerg, probably just because, as a huge Højbjerg fan, who's been for a long time, I hold my hands up, and I don't think he's been fantastic this season, especially defensively. But I think, I can't remember when he gave the ball away once, yesterday, or even, passed the ball backwards. The first time in the game for a whole 90 minutes, I think he was forward thinking. That pass, for the first goal as well, fantastic, really, really good forward thinking pass, which I thought was fantastic, and we need more of that. So for me, he just edges it over Romero, but we mustn't forget about Kane. and others. And we touched on this earlier, didn't we, about Richarlison's performance? But Spurs Live
Yeah.
might have not been here. It says, what about Richie? What do you make of his performance? So, do you want to quickly summarise what you said,
I
David?
just I don't think it was a bad performance. I think it was an uncomfortable performance in the sense of he knew he couldn't perform to his best in the situation he was in, but ultimately he came in and he did exactly what he was told to do. And until the manager changes his stubbornness or the club appoint a new manager that can get the best out of him, I'm not going to fault him for his performances unless he does anything reckless, because very much like Emerson, it's a square peg in a round hole, and he either needs to get used to it and grow and mold into that, like Emerson has, or it'll need a change of system which benefits the player. So I'm not going to lay into Richarlison too much. I think he will offer so much for Spurs, but at the moment, I think it needs to be, we need to lay off of him and we need to put focus on the manager and the decisions made. What if he was meant to be a backup striker to Kane? Then why is he not playing the number 9? If he wasn't and he was meant to be a winger, why have we signed a striker to play on the wing? And that needs to be the thought process behind his performances at the moment. But like I say, we've had many second chance players at Spurs. Sissoko was one of them, a cult hero by the end. Emerson's become one of them. And, Richarlison will be that person. It's not his fault that was the going rate for a player now. We bought in a Premier League experienced striker. If Kane was to get injured and he was playing the number 9 and scoring goals, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 goals between now and the end of the season, we'd all be saying, oh, that was worth the money. So I would say bear with it and wait and see, because I firmly believe there's a lot more to come from Richarlison in a Spurs shirt. I'm just not convinced it's going to be in this system.
Yeah, well said, David. I can't disagree with you there. I think as much as I didn't think that was Richarlison's best game in the Spurs shirt, and you could see that, couldn't you? I think when he came off, he looked frustrated with himself. I think partly frustrated coming off, but I think mainly frustrated with his performance. So yes, Spurs Live, if you're still here, I think that's an interesting comment. I agree with David in terms of I think he's been played in the wrong position. We both touched on this. I would like to see him play in a 3-5-2 alongside Kane, or even in front of Kane dropping behind him. I think that he works for Brazil, and there's only so much Richarlison can do stuck out on the wing. So I think Conte and Stellini, I'm going to add both their names into it. They've got to be, not be
Got to
quite
take
stubborn.
responsibility ultimately to a degree for Richarlison's performances.
Go right. Yeah, 100%. And I think that Spurs Live does agree with you as well, David, and also makes an interesting comment. Big difference how Stellini makes subs, and look at what difference it made. I think it was Son. I think that made a huge difference. I think it was right to drop him personally. For me, David, I don't know about you, but I think it sets that high standard, an example that there's no guaranteed starters and you have to perform to get in this team. I was having this discussion before the game, with a few different people. I said the same thing that on Potland Podcast Saturday. I said I want to see Son dropped to set that standard, to show that you've got to work hard to get in the team. Like I said, the same when Kane went through that tough patch of form when he wanted to leave as well. I said, drop him, set an example, because guarantee, regardless of your profile and ego, I think that sets an example that however much you're earning, whatever big player, big profile name you have, there is no such thing as guaranteed starters. Just because you made it professional football in the team week in, week out, doesn't mean you can turn up and not give 110%. I want to know what you think on that, David, about Son. I know we touched on this, but I think it was the right thing to do for Son, and I think players need to be taught lessons. As much as I love Son, he's been poor this season, and I think he came off the bench and scored, so I think he realised he's got to step up. What do you think about that, David?
I do agree to an extent. I believe that no player is bigger than the club, and I believe that certain things and certain performances and certain behaviours are required to be dropped. However, I come back to the point, and I wish I'd actually got a photo so I could show you, but I haven't. But it comes back to my point of Son's average heat map this season. He's clearly being told to move into a role which he doesn't play. And Son's best performances are out wide as a winger cutting in. Now, while we might start in a 3-4-3, everybody knows in football that the biggest tale of a player's performance, or the biggest tale of a system's structure, is about where the players are during the game, not where they start, not where they finish, where they are during the game. And in comparison, Son is closer to the two central midfielders than he is to Kane, which when he comes off the bench, and this is why he got the hat trick against Leicester, this is why he scored against West Ham. When you come off the bench, you can be further forward, because at this point, it doesn't really matter. You're already winning. Go do what you want to do.
Freedom, yeah.
That's where his goals have come from. When he's being told to start in a conservative position, it doesn't work. It's the same reason why Richarlison. The best way for me to put it, there's a reason why nobody on that left side, in terms of that left wing role, anyone who's played there, Perisic when he played there, Son when he's played there, Richarlison when he's played there, there's a reason why all three of those players played in that role have not played that role well this season.
Yeah.
There's no coincidence. You can't tell me that every single one of those players that plays left wing is a bad player or is an out of form player. There's only so long before you can sit there and say, well, okay, what about that role isn't working? Not about what player that plays it. What about that role that plays it? And I'll respond to that comment in a second. But it's for me, it's not about at a certain amount of time. If you take out, let's say for example, you take out Emerson, you put in Porro, and Porro plays better. Fair enough. Emerson's out of form. You take out, I don't know, for argument's sake, Romero, bring in Davinson Sanchez. Sanchez plays well. Fair enough. Let's say you take out Son and you put in Richarlison and he doesn't play well. So you take out Richarlison, you put in Perisic, he doesn't play well. Take out Perisic and you put in, I don't know, somebody else on the left. They don't play well. At some point in time, you've got to sit there and say, what I'm asking my left-sided players to do is not working. And you either change the system, you change the role, or you accept the fact that you're playing with 10 men, because that's how it's been. That left-sided player, we have not had anybody play on that left wing this season who has had any amount of form whatsoever. So as a football tactician and as a guy who's played more hours of Football Manager than I care to admit, you play 3 or 4 players in the same role over the course of the season, and they finish on 3 goals between them. That all 3 of those players can't be bad. All 3 of those players can't be in bad form. All 3 of those players can't be ineffective as individuals. So you have to sit there and say, okay, what I'm asking that player to do, whoever plays in that role, because it's not like Conte's asking Richarlison and Son to do completely different jobs. That role, that left wing role, are being asked to be told to do the exact same thing. So clearly that job that they're doing, the system's not built for that, or the players aren't built for that. That's where I sit there and say someone like Kane could be more effective, or alternate it. So have your more defensive option on the left in Davies, have your more attacking right wing option on the right in Porro, have Kulusevski as the one that tucks into the 3-man midfield, and Son the one that pushes out wide and forward. Switch the roles basically. So have your left as a more defensive and your right as more attacking, and not the other way around. And I think Kulusevski dropping into that Son space on the right, where he's been on the left, I think you then get the best out of everybody. Clearly, Conte's not prepared to do that. Clearly, Stellini, even in making the decisions himself, isn't prepared to do that. So, unfortunately, this is where I say that the system's going to be the downfall of the players. And I firmly believe that we were to go and play a 4-3-3 or a 4-2-3-1 with Son on that left wing, I think we'd see a completely different version of Son, like we did under Jose Mourinho, like we did under Pochettino, like we did under Nuno to a degree. God knows how many other managers we've had in between. The kind of player we've seen is completely different. I just think you compare the role Son's being asked to do, or the role that left side's being asked to do this season to last season, it's a lot more defensive, it's a lot more central, and it doesn't fit any player we have there. So, yeah, I just think, unfortunately, the manager needs to look at that and say, I've got to take responsibility for this.
Yeah, 100%. I can't disagree with you, David. And we will get on to, I keep saying this, but very, very shortly, we will get on to Conte, his long-term, short-term future at the club, because I think his stubbornness is an issue. I want to quickly, before we move on, touch on this comment.
Yes, I saw that comment.
Just quickly, a lot of money for a backup. And if you don't mind, David, I'd like to start by saying, that is true. but I wouldn't put that on
Yeah.
Richarlison. I know I see lots of comments scrolling through Twitter, from big accounts as well, saying, what a flop Richarlison has been, what a waste of money. I'd like to shut down those comments immediately and say that it's rubbish, because one, he's been injured the whole time, and he's had a stubborn, yes, maybe an elite manager, but a stubborn manager, right, who isn't playing him in the right position. He got injured for a long while, right? And he played in the World Cup as well. You mustn't forget that. But I think he's been played, we've discussed this already, been played in the wrong positions. There's a lot of money, of course, yeah, but lots of other players have lots of money. Look at City for Jack Grealish. That's a lot of money. Is he worth 100 million? I think he's a great player. I don't think so. Richarlison, a lot of money, but I still think he's worth that. And I still think he's better than Jesus if he's played in the right position. So right
Yeah.
now, I'm on Richarlison's side. I feel so sorry for him. He's been injured for a long, long time. He was injured for a while, which is a problem for us, and you can tell we missed him. And he showed, didn't he, towards the start of the season? West Ham, when we played them away, he came, he made players. He's got that fight, got the spirit. Yesterday, you can't fault his effort. There's only so much he can do in a defensive team, stuck on the wing. I have a really strong opinion about this. I think it's absolutely ridiculous. Stuck on the wing, in a low block when he's never going to get the ball. And, Conte's inviting this criticism of Richarlison. And I've had this discussion on the show before, how we're a laughing stock. And Conte has a lot to answer for that. People laughing at Richarlison as we speak, because we've got a manager who's accepting that and not willing to adapt and accept mistakes. How can you be an elite manager if you can't, and one of the world's best, by the way, rate him highly, but how can you be an elite manager if you can't accept your mistakes? But firstly, David, I just want to know, your thoughts on this comment, your thoughts. I have really strong opinions about this, so I want to hear,
I
others' opinions.
echo absolutely everything you just said. Absolutely spot on. The manager has to take responsibility. There's a lot more to come from Richarlison. And at the moment, I do feel sorry for him, because if you look at where he has been effective this season, like I say, that Marseille game in the Champions League, where was he? He was in and around the penalty spot. He got 2 goals, headed perfectly into the bottom corner from 2 exquisite crosses. Why? Because he was where a striker is meant to be. It'd be like you turn around and Conte starting Kane at central centre back, and then at the end of the game going, Harry Kane, shit, he didn't score today. What do you expect? And that might seem more extreme, but that's what you're doing to Richarlison, he's not a player who cuts inside and hits it to the far corner. He's a player when he towards the back end of his time at Watford, his entire time at Everton, he's a player who gets in the middle, gets up, gets aggressive with a defender, gets under their nose, gets under their face, and heads the ball or taps the ball into the back of the net. And you're not going to see that if he's all the way over here. And until, like you say, completely spot on, until Conte accept that, we're going to have the same problem. And for me, it's one of the many reasons why, as much as I love Conte, and ironically, I actually managed to convince my other half to name one of her fish, Antonio, due
Yeah, I
to
love
my
that.
love of Conte. But
That's good.
I do think that so many things I've seen this season have led me to believe that, unfortunately, he is not the solution for Spurs.
Yeah,
Regardless of
absolutely.
whether he could be given £400 million tomorrow and told he could buy any player in the world that he likes. I still don't believe he'd be the solution for Spurs.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, David, for your opinion. And the Conte discussions coming next after we're going to dive
Yeah,
into individual
looking
performances.
forward
Then
to
we're
it.
going to get into it. I could talk about this all day. I have a really strong opinion about this. I think he's so stubborn, but I've got to move on. And Spurs Live says, "Of course, I'm here," responding to my earlier comment, which is what we want to hear. Yeah, absolutely fantastic. But before we get into Conte, I keep saying this, but I think it's really important to address. First, clean sheet for Spurs. For Fraser Forster, yesterday against West Ham. I'd like to say, firstly, I think he had an excellent game. I don't know what you think, guys. I don't know what you think, David, but I think he had a good game against Milan. Was unlucky not to get a clean sheet. Made a couple of great saves for that goal, which I thought we poorly defended. As a team, I thought he made a couple of excellent saves considering his age. Being able to talk about not being able to get down on the floor. I think he set an example. There I thought was really good. And I don't know about you, David, but I think he certainly deserved that clean sheet against West Ham.
I definitely do think he did against West Ham. I'm going to talk about his performance against Milan in a minute, because My opinion is completely opposite to yours. But against West Ham, I thought he was solid. I thought his distribution was good. And I thought we saw a lot more of the Southampton Fraser Forster, who wound us up for 180 minutes 180 minutes over the course of the season every time we played against him. He was that player who commanded his area. He was that player that looked confident. I think his performances to start with at Spurs have almost looked like he doesn't believe he deserves to be there. And regardless of a fan's opinion, Spurs have opted to buy him. They've offered him the contract. They've offered him a 2-year deal. So for me, you do deserve to be there, you know. And at that point, you then have to prove you deserve to be there, but don't sit there stressing about it to the point where it impacts your performance.
Yeah.
I'm going to say that the goal we conceded against Milan, as bad as the defending was, parrying the ball into the middle of the 6-yard box under any circumstances, I don't care whether you are the best goalkeeper in the world or whether you are Sunday League, that is absolutely schoolboy error. You put the ball as far away from the center as possible. You put it out wide. You put it behind the goal. You grab it, you punch it, whatever. But you do not absolutely, under any circumstances, push the ball out into the middle of the 6-yard box. I had the same issue with Vorm, who did it far too often. The biggest one that comes to mind, we got knocked out against Leicester in the League Cup about 5-6 years ago now. You absolutely can't do that. If you are a top goalkeeper at the top level, you just cannot do that. And he didn't do it for Southampton. So why he did it for Spurs, I don't know. And I think, if I'm honest, I think it was the pressure. You're at a big club, supposed to be anyway. You're playing in the Champions League. It's a big moment. You're away at one of the most iconic stadiums in the entire of Europe. I think the pressure got to him. If I see him do that again, I don't want to see him put the Spurs shirt on again, because you absolutely can't. And I have the same energy for Lloris. I have the same energy for Lloris. Anyone who follows me on Twitter or has followed me on Twitter at any point in the last 7 years, I have the same energy for Lloris when he's done it. As a professional goalkeeper, you cannot push the ball into the 6-yard box. That's my Milan discussion over, because I'll just rant about it for ages. West Ham looked like a complete different goalkeeper. He looked composed. He looked mature. He looked experienced. He looked commanding. He looked like a complete different player. So for me, I think it was the Champions League nerves. But again, I don't want to see that mistake again. I like his distribution a lot. I think it offered a lot against West Ham. I think we weren't under pressure so much against West Ham as when Lloris decides to pass it short, when there's a bloody striker stood 2 feet in front of our centre-back all the goddamn time for the last 10 years. He's done it on and off. We didn't really see that from Forster. I thought he was responsible. He put the ball out wide to the centre-backs, to the wing-backs, to the wingers. So, yeah, I thought it was a great performance against West Ham. And I want to see more of that Forster. I want to see more of the Southampton Forster that had us wanting to throw shoes at our TV and scream and shout and swear every time we saw him play against Spurs. That's what I want to see going forward for him in the time that Lloris is injured. Let's see what happens. Let's see what happens. You can only build off that performance now. I think he needs to forget the Milan performance and move on. But like I say, if he starts repeating the same mistakes over and over again, then he'd be lucky to make it to the end of the summer transfer window. As for the comment that was made before, obviously he wasn't meant to be a starter, but Spurs' biggest problem in the last 5 years has been we've bought a backup keeper with the intention to never, ever play them. And how many times has Lloris been injured, or have we had to bring a keeper in? Michel Vorm, how many cup runs did he cost us over the years? Joe Hart didn't exactly paint himself in glory in his time as a Spurs shirt. Who else have we had? Obviously, I say young keepers, they're as old as me now, but, they've never really had a look in. And when they have, Brandon Austin and players like that, they've not looked great at all, to be honest. They've not looked like they're going to push Lloris, which is what we wanted 5 years ago when they were 19 or whatever. So, yeah, that for me, I think he just needs to build off that West Ham performance now, use it as a positive, work with those defenders as well. I think that's massively important. My only concern is Lloris has played with this defense for at least 18 months now. Forster hasn't. And if we're going to keep chopping and changing the personnel at the back, I think we're going to see Forster have lower quality performances. For me now, keep Perisic, and I hate to say it, Porro, until we need to go for a game. But I would start with that exact back line that we started
Yeah,
against West Ham for as long as Forster is in goal. Because I think the consistency, I think the reliability,
important.
not that Eric
Yeah,
Dyer's reliable, but the reliability of the exact same players. You know where they move, you know what passes they make. You know if Eric Dyer's going to run into midfield and give the ball away, you know how to deal with that. If we start chopping and changing that too much, it's going to be a nightmare for Forster and he's going to sign his own death warrant. So I think the coach, whoever it is for the next game against Chelsea, has a duty for me to protect the goalkeeper because he's not played for Spurs for his whole career.
yeah, yeah. No, thank you for your that point, David. It's interesting because I actually thought we had a good game against Milan. I'd like to see what people think in the comments, but I thought, for our goal, I thought we made a couple of good saves. I appreciate what you said about where you parry it. And I would say for any other goalkeeper, I never get why you do that. But for someone like Fraser Forster, I think to get down there in the first place, to be fair, but I would put that goal on our defence, the likes of Romero, getting out jumped. I thought Dyer was too slow to come across. Perisic wasn't quick enough to get up the floor. I thought Fraser Forster actually done best in that situation, but it's interesting. But I'm going to throw a question at you before we do
Go
move on
for it.
finally and talk about Conte. Obviously, you mentioned second keeper being an issue. You mentioned Mitchell Vaughan. I think you mentioned likes of Gazaniga, Joe Hart, and now
I didn't actually. Gazaniga was the one I didn't mention because I thought he was the best of the backup keepers
I
we've
like
had, and he's the one
Gazaniga.
who played the least. So I don't understand that. But
Yeah, fair enough. I like Gazaniga.
Pau
I
Lopez is
agree
another
with you
one to
there.
throw in there as well.
Yeah, and now obviously you got Fraser Forster. Is it time, do you think, for whoever's our manager, and perhaps the youth academy has a say in this? Is it time to put, not necessarily put the responsibility, but give an opportunity as a backup goalkeeper to the likes of Brandon Austin and Alfie Whiteman and give them a chance? And not necessarily now, but going forward. I know you've got Brandon Austin sat on the bench at the moment, but if you think Fraser Forster is an issue, would you like to see Brandon Austin and Alfie Whiteman, who the Youth Academy, by the way, have hyped up for years since I was really, really young? I remember going to the academy. They talk
And
about
me
him.
too, actually.
Yeah, do you remember? Yeah, they still talk about him now.
Yeah.
So I want to see
So
less talk and more action. So I want to know, do you want to see younger goalkeepers, our second goalkeeper? Because perhaps the age and experience has let us down slightly as a backup goalkeeper.
my answer is no, because I've always felt that an experienced goalkeeper is the way to go. That's for me why I wanted us to sign Nick Pope last summer and take out the fact that he decided to start playing rugby in the last game. He's been absolutely outstanding for Newcastle.
What was that
And
about?
for £11 million, I don't understand why Spurs wouldn't go for someone like that. But anyway, that's a whole different problem. I would always go for the more experience. And like you say, Brandon Austin and Alfie Whiteman have been hyped up since I was a kid, which was far too long ago than I care to admit. And for me, if they were going to be good enough to push into the first team, they'd be there already. It's been far too long now. For me, I want to go and see us get a commanding quality backup goalkeeper and actually spend the money on it rather than, I mean, look at a Forest. My dad's a Forest fan, right? And they've got a Champions League winner in goal, and then they've got Dean Henderson, who's played absolutely out of his skin. For me, he'd be one of my first choices for Spurs in the summer. He's been absolutely fantastic. Apart from the little kind of punch into the floor he does whenever they score, he looks like he's throwing a strop. He's not, but he looks like it. But for me, the other one, West Ham aren't going to play him. They're clearly not playing him. But whenever Areola's played for West Ham during his loans during the course of the 2 years on loan, he's been fantastic. PSG are open to selling him for, I think, £5 million is what they quoted West Ham last year before West Ham proposed another loan. £5 million for a backup goalkeeper who, when we've actually watched him play, has been fantastic. If you offered me Dean Henderson and Areola for the start of next season to rotate between the two, I'd argue they're both as good as each other, one with a lot of room to grow, the other one coming towards the end of his career. I think that would be the perfect balance. And it'd probably cost us no more than £35 million. I think for me, this has to be Lloris's last season in a Spurs shirt.
Yeah.
I said that when we offered him a new deal, not because we needed him to, not because we wanted him to stay, which sounds kind of harsh, but because the club were so ill prepared to replace him that we had no choice but to offer him a new deal.
Yeah, I agree.
And I don't want to be sat here in 2 years' time in the exact same boat again, which I'm very concerned we might be.
Yeah, I think we should have looked for a personally long-term replacement last summer. We need to get on with that. For me, that's our priority of the summer. Lloris isn't getting any younger. Mistakes are creeping into our game. Final thing, before we wrap up about the West Ham game, I want to talk tiny bit, because we're getting towards the end, about Conte, and then about thoughts going into the Chelsea game to finish it off. But I want to know your thoughts on Emerson Royale's recent performances, because he has been playing blinders recently. And I want to know what you put that down to.
I put that down to determination. I put that down to passion, and I put that down to commitment. He loves this club like nobody I've seen. Take out your obvious, your Kanes, your Sons, whatever. For a player to come in on the price tag he did based on what he'd done in Spain, which wasn't a lot, he's invested so much of his own money in personal trainers, in personal tacticians, in whatever he could do to improve his game. And for me, I think it's his work rate, his passion, his commitment, and his love for Spurs and his love for the fans that's turned it around, which ultimately was the same thing that turned it around for Sissoko in the end. And the fact that he actually stopped being played on the right wing by Poch and started being played in central midfield. But that's a whole different rant that I could do for hours. But yeah, I think it comes down to his passion, his commitment, and his love for Spurs. And long may it continue, because as far as I'm concerned right now, I'd be more than happy to give Spence a Premier League loan next year and have Emerson and Pedro Porro as our wing backs until Spence is ready to come in. All depends on the manager, but given the fact that we've just gone and brought Pedro Porro, for me, Spence isn't going to be starting anytime soon. So I'd be inclined to say for next season, long may it continue, then it's Porro and it's Emerson for me going forward.
Yeah, thank you. Interesting point. Quickly, my thoughts on Emerson. I agree with you. Commitment, determination, key factor with that. You're talking about a player that all us fans wanted to get rid of not that long ago. We're also talking about a player who spent £1 million to improve. There's that commitment there. Willing to dip his hand in his own pocket, which not many players like to do. So yeah, I think that shows commitment from him, and fair play to him. He's definitely stepped up, fought for his place, and deserves his place for me. David, I want to know your thoughts about Antonio Conte. But before that, Christian Stellini has said after the West Ham game that he's not expecting Antonio Conte back until after the Chelsea match. Firstly, do you think this is a good thing or not? And do you think, when can you see Conte coming back?
It's interesting. So whether I think it's good, that is the question, isn't it? Whether I think it's a good thing or a bad thing, I think it's a good thing, because we do not need a repeat of what happened at Stamford Bridge. And as much as Thomas Tuchel was, part of my French, an arsehole during the way he reacted, Conte was equally as responsible. And they both know better. And for me, Chelsea, his history, it's just easier to avoid it. So I would say that's valid, and I think that was the right thing to do. When he'll be back, I actually said the other day, I don't know if he will be. Because he's lost so much this year. He's been through so much this year. His family aren't here. And given the fact that he didn't move back to England, it was never, ever, ever going to be long term. Never.
Yeah.
So at that point, I would have to say, if he's not going to sign, which I don't think he is, nor do I want him to at this point in time, I would say it'd be better to go now than at the end of the season. I would say AC Milan are in March. I would have Stellini till then. I would have Conte back for the AC Milan game. If we go out, I would let Conte go. If we stay in, I would stick with it as long as we're in the Champions League. Once we're out the Champions League, I'd let him go. Unless we make it to like the semi-final or beyond, at that point in which just wait to the end of the season. But for me, if we go out against AC Milan at home, that has to be it, because it's clear the club aren't for him long term. It's clear England isn't for him long term. And given what he's been through, I don't blame him. But I don't think it's a long-term solution. I don't think it's been a long-term solution for a while now. So yeah, for me, I think see how it goes, but I think it has to be it at the end of the season.
Yeah, quick summary on that for me. I think we're talking about a manager, he's had a tough year, lost some friends, close friends to him, which isn't easy, family back in Italy. And now, with his gallbladder surgery, he's gone through a tough year, but I'd be happy right now sticking with Stellini. I think he's doing a good job. Perhaps Conte has some kind of different effect on the players, but I'm happy with things how they are as of now. I think it's completely other discussion, long term after the summer. But finally, Luke, and finally, David, to end the show. Sorry, used to that on Parkley podcast. David, I want to know your quick thoughts going into that Chelsea game and how you feel.
So as quickly as I can, I'd like to see us win. My other half's nan is a hardcore Chelsea fan, so if we lose, I'll never really end of it. So at this point, I'd bite your hand off for a draw. Is the easiest thing to say, to be honest. Which sounds really bad because Chelsea are in the worst form they've been in for as long as I can remember. But it's still Chelsea, and it's better than losing at home.
Yeah, thank you.
I think that's the easiest way to kind of put it.
Yeah, and I look at it and go, it's a big game. I want us to turn up. I think they'll be looking for revenge. It's never going to be easy. So David, thank you for coming on. Pleasure to have you. I think you've been fantastic today. So where can people find you, David?
So I'm on everything. Let me go through because I can't remember everything. If you go on YouTube and search David's Football Manager or David's Glory Hunter, you'll see my channel. There's loads of Football Manager stuff on there. There's going to be some more non-Football Manager stuff. But I'm addicted to my Football Manager series at the moment. You can find me on Twitter, DA_vids19. I believe the Instagram account, which I made recently, is DA_vidsFM. And then obviously on YouTube as well. I'm sure no doubt Harry will put the links in. So if you guys watch this back, then you can click them and stuff. I chat random rubbish. I play a lot of Football Manager. Other than that, it's nice and simple. It's a good laugh. It's a good joke. It's a good vibe. And there's some surprises coming up on the channel in the next 2 weeks as well. So stay tuned for that.
Thank you, David. You've been a fantastic guest. I can't thank you.
No worries. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Anytime. So yeah, go check David out on all socials. If you want to follow me, I'm your host, Harry. Follow me there, HarryScarf22 on all socials. But most importantly, if you liked it, leave a like, subscribe to the channel. That helps me in the channel, short and long term, as we've discussed. And follow us on all socials. We're a fan channel and independent hub, transfer news, now live shows every Monday, 8 p.m. David being my guest today, fantastic guest. Post-match reactions, pre-match previews, player ratings, you name it, a lot more to come. So please go check us out on all socials, including YouTube. So yeah, as
the biggest thing of all, come on, you Spurs.
Come on, you Spurs.